In the sweltering heat of Benghazi, Libya, during the late summer of 2012, a quiet but tense mission was unfolding behind the tall, nondescript walls of a former compound nestled within the city. Officially labeled a diplomatic outpost, this facility was far more than it seemed. Operated primarily by the Central Intelligence Agency, the outpost was part of a broader intelligence network gathering information on jihadist movements, weapons trafficking, and the chaotic post-revolution landscape of Libya following the fall of Muammar Gaddafi. After Gaddafi's death in 2011, Libya became a battleground of rival militias, extremist groups, and foreign intelligence services. In the eastern city of Benghazi, power vacuums were quickly filled by armed Islamist factions, some of which had ties to Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb and other transnational terror groups. In this uncertain environment, the CIA established a presence with two key sites, the so-called Temporary Mission Facility, or TMF, and a nearby heavily guarded CIA Annex compound about a mile away. Although the TMF appeared to be a diplomatic consulate, it was lightly staffed, and much of its true purpose was to provide diplomatic cover for the CIA's activities. Inside the Annex, a small team of paramilitary officers from the CIA's Global Response Staff, GRS, supported by intelligence analysts and contractors, worked day and night to identify threats, track foreign fighters, and disrupt weapons flows across North Africa. Among the men assigned to this covert mission were former Special Operations soldiers and Marines turned CIA security contractors. These GRS operators, such as Tyrone Roan Woods, Glenn Bub Doherty, Mark Geist, and Chris Tanto Paranto, were highly experienced and handpicked for their ability to work in hostile environments with little support. Their job was to protect CIA personnel, gather intelligence on jihadist cells, and remain invisible in a city growing more dangerous by the day. The situation in Benghazi was deteriorating. Reports of surveillance on the compound were increasing. Militias, some of them once allied with the US during the revolution, now operated freely in the city. The Libyan government had minimal control, and security forces were unreliable at best. Warnings from intelligence analysts and regional experts were piling up. The CIA's team took these seriously, but options were limited. Their footprint had to remain small. Drawing too much attention could compromise operations or escalate tensions with local groups. Ambassador Chris Stevens arrived in Benghazi on September 10, 2012, for meetings with local officials and to reaffirm the U.S. diplomatic presence in the region. He was a seasoned diplomat with a deep understanding of Libyan politics and culture. Stevens had supported the Libyan revolution and was widely respected, but his visit, even briefly, to the TMF raised concerns among the security team. The facility lacked the fortifications and support usually provided for such high-level diplomatic visits. Special Ops 6 is now live. If you're into elite gear, field-ready morale patches, and real operator culture, this is for you. Tap the link in the description or head to the channel and click the store link. Join the team, grab your gear, and support the mission, and let's get back to it. That night, the city remained restless. Militia vehicles roamed the streets, and the TMF's small Libyan guard force appeared nervous. Inside the compound, Ambassador Stevens and a small team settled in, joined by Information Officer Sean Smith. Meanwhile, at the CIA Annex, the GRS team maintained a heightened state of readiness. They monitored the situation and prepared for the unexpected, even as their repeated requests for additional security over the past months had gone largely unanswered. September 11, 2012. 11 years after the attacks on New York and Washington, the date carried a heavy weight for all Americans serving overseas. For the CIA personnel in Benghazi, it was business as usual on paper, but the atmosphere was tense. As evening approached, local chatter picked up. Social media and intercepted communications hinted at increased movement among militia groups. Still, nothing pointed to a specific, actionable threat. Then, just after 9:40 p.m. local time, chaos erupted. Dozens of heavily armed attackers stormed the TMF. Armed with AK-47s, RPGs, and Molotovs, the assault was swift and coordinated. The Libyan guards fled or were quickly overrun. Inside the compound, U.S. diplomatic personnel scrambled to secure classified materials and defend their position. The attackers set fire to buildings using diesel fuel to intensify the flames. Smoke filled the air as Ambassador Stevens and Sean Smith became trapped in the main building's safe haven, which quickly turned into a death trap due to the heat and lack of ventilation. At the CIA Annex, the GRS team received the distress call. Despite being under orders to stand down temporarily, a delay attributed to chain of command confusion and an effort to coordinate with friendly Libyan militias, the operators soon decided they could wait no longer. Just after 10 p.m., they loaded into vehicles and sped toward the TMF through dark, hostile streets. Upon arrival, they found the compound engulfed in flames and chaos. The main building was inaccessible due to the inferno, and attackers were still present in the area. The team cleared the grounds under fire, searching desperately for Stevens and Smith. They recovered Smith's body, but Ambassador Stevens was missing. Unable to locate him and facing growing enemy presence, the GRS team made the difficult decision to extract remaining survivors and return to the Annex for a defensive stand. Back at the Annex, the CIA base was already preparing for a siege. Reinforcements were requested, but support from Tripoli and other U.S. assets would take time. The team knew they were on their own for now. They fortified positions, distributed weapons, and coordinated defensive plans. Their experience in combat zones like Iraq and Afghanistan would be the only advantage they held against an enemy that vastly outnumbered them. Around midnight, the attacks on the Annex began. Waves of armed fighters probed the perimeter with small arms fire and RPGs. The defenders held their ground, repelling each attempt with disciplined fire and years of combat experience. Through it all, the CIA officers inside continued their work encrypting communications, coordinating with Washington, and preparing for worst-case scenarios. Meanwhile, news began to filter out across the world. An American diplomatic post was under siege. Conflicting reports, media speculation, and a lack of clarity about who exactly was under attack added to the confusion. Inside the compound, none of that mattered. Survival was the only mission. By the early hours of September 12, 2012, the CIA annex in Benghazi had become the last American stronghold in a city spiraling into chaos. The initial assault on the nearby Temporary Mission Facility, TMF, had ended in disaster. Ambassador Chris Stevens and Information Officer Sean Smith were dead. The compound burned and abandoned. Now, a team of CIA security contractors, known as the Global Response Staff, GRS, hunkered down at the Annex preparing for a second wave. The situation was dire. The Annex was never meant to endure a sustained military-style assault. It was a secure, but covert facility, disguised within a residential neighborhood, with only a few buildings surrounded by concrete walls and steel gates. Inside were intelligence personnel, analysts, and a handful of operators, no more than 30 Americans total. Their defense lay in their experience, their training, and their determination not to let what happened at the consulate be repeated. The team included former Navy SEALs Tyrone Roan Woods and Glenn Bub Doherty, both highly decorated veterans who had seen combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. They had volunteered for this mission, aware of the risks. Alongside them were other operators such as Mark Osgeist, Chris Tanto Paranto, and John Tig Teagan. These men had worked together for months, training Libyan personnel, escorting assets, and gathering intelligence. Now, their mission had changed: hold the Annex at all costs. Shortly after midnight, enemy movement around the compound increased. Shadows danced in the alleyways, and muffled voices carried over the walls. The attackers, a mix of Islamist fighters and local militia, had followed the GRS team from the consulate and were probing for weaknesses. Small arms fire cracked in the distance. Then came the first RPG. The rocket slammed into the outer wall, sending concrete fragments flying and marking the beginning of the siege. Automatic fire erupted from multiple directions. The defenders returned fire with discipline and precision. Despite being outnumbered, the GRS team had the advantage of familiarity with the compound and professional coordination. They rotated positions, covered each other's flanks, and relayed updates through radios. Inside the Annex, the atmosphere was tense but controlled. CIA staff were moved into secure rooms. Intelligence equipment was secured or destroyed. Communications with Washington and Tripoli were ongoing, but real-time help was still hours away. A reinforcement team, including Glenn Doherty, was being assembled in Tripoli, but getting them to Benghazi would require a private jet, local coordination, and landing in a city under siege. Meanwhile, U.S. air and military assets in the region were either too far away or hampered by unclear orders and political constraints. The GRS team understood that for the time being, they were completely on their own. Wave after wave of attackers tested the Annex's defenses. Some tried to climb over the walls, others fired RPGs and mortars from adjacent rooftops. The operators moved constantly, firing from behind sandbags and door frames, using night vision to scan for threats. Mark Geist took shrapnel to the arm but continued fighting. The rest of the team remained under fire for hours, shifting between suppressing attacks and preparing for medical contingencies. By 3 a.m., reinforcements finally arrived, a small group of additional security contractors from Tripoli, including Glenn Doherty. The plane had touched down at the Benghazi airport, and after the tense negotiations with local militia, the team made it to the Annex. Their arrival gave a brief morale boost, but they had little time to settle in. At 5:15 a.m., the enemy launched a coordinated mortar attack. 3 81mm mortar rounds were fired with chilling precision. The first exploded near a building, shaking the entire compound. The second hit the rooftop where Woods and Doherty were providing overwatch. The blast was fatal. Both men were killed instantly. A third round struck moments later, injuring multiple operators, including Geist, who suffered devastating wounds to his arm and hand. The attack was swift, brutal, and highly accurate, likely directed by someone familiar with Western defensive positions. The remaining GRS team scrambled to contain the damage. They pulled their fallen teammates from the rooftop, administered aid to the wounded, and resecured defensive positions. Despite their losses, they refused to abandon the Annex. The fighting eventually subsided, not because of any outside help, but because the attackers had exhausted their assault and the sun had begun to rise. As daylight broke over Benghazi, the battered team prepared for evacuation. Through diplomatic channels, a deal had been arranged with a local militia to escort the Americans to the airport. It was a dangerous arrangement, but the only viable option. At dawn, armored vehicles arrived, and the remaining CIA officers, operators, and wounded were loaded up and driven through the devastated streets. By 10 a.m., they were wheels up headed to Tripoli, carrying with them the bodies of 4 Americans and the scars of a night that would change the course of modern intelligence operations. The siege had lasted nearly 8 hours. The defenders had fought off multiple coordinated attacks by determined enemy fighters. No reinforcements arrived from the U.S. military, no drones or fighter jets intervened. The GRS team had relied solely on their skill, experience, and each other. The Battle of Benghazi was over. The political firestorm was just beginning. By the afternoon of September 12, 2012, the surviving CIA officers and security contractors who had defended the Benghazi Annex were in Tripoli, exhausted and wounded. Behind them lay a scorched diplomatic facility, a battered CIA compound, and 4 American dead: Ambassador Chris Stevens, Information Officer Sean Smith, and GRS operators Tyrone Woods and Glenn Doherty. For those who had fought through the night, the mission was over, but the fallout was just beginning. Back in Washington, the first reports of the attack were chaotic and incomplete. Early information suggested the violence was the result of a protest over an anti-Islamic video circulating online. In the fog of war, conflicting accounts and poor communication created confusion. The administration, intelligence agencies, and military command struggled to clarify what had happened, who was responsible, and how it all unfolded so quickly. Within days, the CIA began an internal review. Field reports from Benghazi told a different story than early public statements. There had been no protest at the TMF. The attack was a planned and coordinated assault by Islamist militants, likely involving elements of Ansar al-Sharia. Surveillance footage, drone imagery, and intelligence intercepts painted a picture of a deliberate operation designed to target American personnel. The political consequences came swiftly. Members of Congress demanded answers. Why was the ambassador in Benghazi without adequate security? Why had repeated requests for reinforcements and armored vehicles gone unanswered in the months leading up to the attack? Most critically, why was the CIA Annex a covert facility the last line of defense? Public hearings soon followed. CIA officials testified about the nature of their mission, the bravery of the GRS team, and the limited resources available in Benghazi. The survivors remained largely silent, bound by confidentiality agreements and a deep sense of loyalty to their fallen brothers. But over time, their stories emerged through testimony, interviews, and eventually books and films. One of the most publicized accounts came in the form of 13 Hours, the inside account of what really happened in Benghazi, written by Mitchell Zuckoff with contributions from surviving operators. The book shed light on the intense fighting, the decisions made under fire, and the delays in support that may have cost lives. It challenged the official narrative and pushed the events of Benghazi into mainstream debate. Investigations were launched across multiple agencies. The State Department's Accountability Review Board criticized security preparations, but found no evidence of deliberate wrongdoing. Intelligence agencies reviewed their coordination procedures. The Department of Defense examined its readiness to respond to fast-moving crises. Yet, despite all the inquiries, the deep divisions remained. For some, Benghazi became a symbol of bureaucratic failure. For others, it was a story of heroism overshadowed by political blame. Beyond politics, the attack had real-world consequences for U.S. operations abroad. Embassies and consulates across the globe reassessed security protocols. The CIA revised guidelines for the protection of personnel in high-risk areas. In the intelligence and special operations communities, the siege became a case study, a harsh reminder that low-visibility missions in unstable regions carry immense risk, especially when resources are scarce and threats are underestimated. The legacy of those who fought in Benghazi lives on within the intelligence and military ranks. Tyrone Woods and Glenn Doherty were posthumously awarded medals for valor. Their names joined a long list of Americans who died in service under covert circumstances, far from public view. Inside the CIA, the events of that night are remembered not only for the tragedy, but for the bravery displayed by a handful of men who held the line against overwhelming odds. For the surviving members of the GRS team, the scars are physical and emotional. Some returned to the field, others left the world of intelligence entirely. They speak openly about their experience not for recognition, but to ensure the truth is known that the men who died did so fighting to protect their teammates and uphold their oath. Benghazi also forced a reckoning with the limitations of American power. Despite having the world's most advanced military and intelligence capabilities, there are moments when help cannot arrive in time, when choices made far from the battlefield have deadly consequences. The battle exposed gaps in readiness, decision-making, and interagency coordination, but it also reaffirmed the critical role of individuals, those who run toward danger, not away from it. In the years since, Libya has remained unstable. Benghazi itself has seen more violence, shifting alliances, and a continuing power struggle among local factions. The U.S. presence there is gone. The Annex was abandoned, the consulate never rebuilt. What remains is a quiet site marked by loss and memory. For many Americans, Benghazi became a political flashpoint, but for those who were there, it is a deeply personal story of loyalty, sacrifice, and survival. They did not fight for headlines or political points. They fought for each other. The CIA in Benghazi did more than gather intelligence. They stood as the final line of defense when no one else could. Their actions, their courage, and their legacy endure not as a symbol of failure, but as a testament to the grit and resolve of those operating in the shadows of American foreign policy. Remember to like, subscribe, and comment so you don't miss out.